sure is good to see everyone this morning. I'm glad that we can all be here together to worship God and to study from His Word. As was mentioned in the announcements, this will be our second week that we're having both the Building Our Faith and the Young Families get together. It went really well last time. I guess it would be 2 weeks ago now. We're doing it every other week. So it went really well. We're excited to do it again this week, and hope that you can, if you know any kids or any young families, please be sure to invite them. And for those of y'all who weren't able to make it last time, who have kids or so forth, we just would love to see you there. It's a lot of fun. 9/11 has etched a very permanent image on our minds, but it was not the first event of its kind to happen even in our own country. If you remember, for those of you who lived through it, or for those of you who might have studied it after the fact, there was an event in Oklahoma City that shocked the nation in much the same way, although on a smaller scale, than 9/11, because it simply hadn't really happened much in our history, in our nation, or in a whole lot of Western nations at the time, at least in the context that we usually think of. There was a bombing called the Oklahoma City bombing. It was an intentional terrorist attack targeting civilians, targeting not a military installation or anything like that. But the interesting thing is one of the perpetrators, Timothy McVeigh, when he was brought to a sentence, he was asked if he had any final words. In his final words that he chose, I believe he may have dictated them or told someone else to read them or something like that. But in any case, the words that he chose were not actually his own words. He chose to reference a poem. The poem is called Invictus. And while I won't quote the whole poem to you, the last part of the poem, it is a poem celebrating the individualism, the control of one's fate. The last words of the poem say, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." The words that to be perfectly literal, mass murderer chose as his final words. I am the captain, or the master of my fate, the captain of my soul. I get to control what I do. I get to control my destiny. Even though I'm being sent to my death, I'm actually the one in control. Those were his assertions after his crime at his end. And yet, even in the midst of something so tragic on so many different levels, tragic both from his perspective in the sense that we don't want anyone to either be guilty of something like that or to suffer the fate that he did, the best case scenario for all people is that they be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. Also, certainly, even in a sense, more tragic for those who were completely innocent in every way and suffered because of this. It gives us a good cause to reflect on that concept. Because what would drive someone to do something like that? Well, certainly one way of looking at it is I get to make my own decisions. I get to choose my own fate. I get to chart my own course, and no one can tell me otherwise. But see, that's not really how life works, is it? Oh, we like to think it is. Americans in particular, we are a very individualistic society. I get to control everything about my life. If I work hard, for example, if I do this and that, then I can make whatever I want to of myself. We love this idea that I am in control, at least of me. But is that really true? Is it really the case that I am, let's just leave aside capable for a second, that I am qualified to be in control? I want us to talk for a few minutes this morning. We're going to use kind of a metaphor from naval, maritime type imagery. We're going to picture our lives as a ship. We're trying to figure out how the ship is going to be governed, how it's going to be captained, if we want to put it that way. Who's going to be the captain of my ship? The hard thing is, we think it's us. Am I qualified to be captain of my own ship, my own life? The answer is no. If we want to talk about this topic, the first thing we have to recognize is that I'm out of the running. You ever worked somewhere where the manager, the boss, the owner was not qualified to be in the position they were in? I imagine most of us have had an experience similar to that. Have you ever been in a situation where maybe you're not in the position of employee or something like that, but maybe a friend or a spouse or a family member, they have been in a situation where the management or whatever is not qualified? I imagine all of us have seen that. And yet somehow we just automatically assume when it comes to our own lives we are qualified. And yet we're not. The bottom line is, no matter how much we deceive ourselves otherwise, if we're going to talk about who is going to be captain of my life, I can't be my own captain. You see, the thing is, I'm the ship. When it really comes down to it, I'm the one who needs to be captained. It's my life we're talking about. When have you ever seen a ship that is capable of sailing itself? That doesn't happen, does it? You have to have someone in charge. You have to have someone who is letting down the sails, who's dealing with the rigging, who's, I don't know, insert other nautical terms. I don't know all this stuff, right? But you have to have someone who is capable of doing all those things. The ship does not reach out wooden arms and start pulling all the ropes and sails in the way it needs to go and turning its own wheel. And yet somehow we think we're capable of doing that. Now, let me ask you something. How many of y'all, if you were to be perfectly honest, how many of y'all, just in one category, can raise your hand and say, I know everything there is to know? Just in one category. I'm not talking about everything. How many of you could raise your hand? Now, there are some things I know a lot about. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying that everyone usually has one or two areas that they have kind of specialized in terms of their knowledge. Whether it's kind of practical knowledge, how to do something with their hands, whether it's more intellectual knowledge, knowing about something, for example, history or science or something like that. But none of us, even in that one area, know everything. Well, guess what? It takes a whole lot of knowledge. It takes a whole lot of understanding. It takes a whole lot of guidance to direct a human life correctly. And I hate to say it, but I don't have that. And I hate to tell you, but you don't either. Solomon, the wisest man in the world, would tell us something about that. We'll get there in just a second because I went to the wrong slide. But Jeremiah, first of all, would tell us, I know, O Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, and it is not in man who walks to direct his own steps. Jeremiah, a prophet of God, speaking on behalf of God, having inspiration, we could say, by the Holy Spirit, not to mention a whole lot of life experience. And he says, not just for himself, but for all people, I know I'm not qualified, and not just I, we, mankind, are not qualified to direct our own steps. We're just not qualified. How many times have you made a poor decision in your life? If you shout out a number, don't embarrass yourself, because we all probably can count at least in the thousands, right? Especially depending on the life experience. We're not qualified to direct our own steps. Notice what Jesus says. Whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. What is he saying there? If it's not within man to direct our own steps, what does that leave us with? Well, we need someone else to direct it, right? I would hope most of us, as we're sitting here in this building, at least have gotten that far in this process of thinking it out. Okay, I don't need to be my own captain. I don't need to make all of my own decisions. I need someone's guidance. I need someone to direct me. So, we think about Jesus. But Jesus does not allow for multiple captains. See, that's where things become interesting. Have you ever seen that bumper sticker, Jesus is my co-pilot? Now, I understand the sentiment. I'm not trying to get on people who might have that bumper sticker because they're not trying to say, in terms of life, Jesus is only the co-pilot. The idea is, Jesus is watching over me as I'm driving, keeping me safe, those kind of things, which that's another discussion. But that, unfortunately, is often our idea in terms of life itself, even though the bumper sticker may not be trying to communicate that. We want Jesus as the co-pilot, but we still want to retain the title of pilot. Or if not us, then in practical terms, something else. My work has to take priority in my life, but I also want Jesus as my co-pilot. My family has to take priority in my life. All the decisions I make ultimately come down to what's best for my family, but Jesus is my co-pilot. That's not the picture Jesus gives us. We may say, I'm not capable of being my captain, but as long as I get help, I can then do the job. Jesus says, whoever is not with me is against me. Whoever does not gather with me scatters. What does that mean? It means there's no fence to sit on. It means when it comes to following Jesus, I'm either in or I'm out. Either he is going to be the captain, or he's not even going to be the co-pilot. Isn't that what he says in Luke chapter 16? No servant can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve God and money. In this context, he's talking about making money the other master, if you will, which really just means it's the master. And you've taken God out of the picture. But we could, again, insert anything in that blank. You don't get to have two. You only get to have one. And it can't be me. There's a funny show that Liz and I like watching, and at one point they appoint two managers to be in charge of this office. I think I've used this illustration before, but it cracked me up, so I'm going to use it again. Everyone is understandably dubious about this idea. Really? We're going to have two managers? And one of the guys, he's like, listen, everyone with a brain knows that no organization can function without two heads, right? What ship sets sail without two captains? What organization, what army rather, can function without two governing generals? Where would Catholicism be without the popes, right? No, it's silly. That doesn't work. You need just one. I'm not capable of charting a course completely on my own, which means I must rely on someone outside of myself. So where does that leave us? Well, ultimately, it leaves us with two options. We don't like that, but it leaves us with two options. One is to allow Satan to be the captain of my life. Now we say, I would never do that, right? I would never, ever let Satan be the captain of my life. But remember what we talked about this morning in class? How Satan used Rome as a tool? Rome is not the only tool that Satan uses. In fact, Satan is capable of using anything as a tool to his own ends. That's what it means to be a corrupter. That's what it means to be a deceiver. Satan takes something else, puts it between us and him, and says, hey, look at this shiny thing, when it's him pulling the strings all along. So what that ends up with then is that anything that I allow to be captain of my life, including myself, is actually Satan, with the exception of God himself. If God is not the captain, whatever else I say is, it's actually Satan. Now, we don't like that, right? If I say my family is my first priority, let's just take that one. That seems noble. That seems honorable. That seems perfectly reasonable. All my decisions in life I'm going to base around my family. They are the ones who decide what decisions I'm going to make, right? Now, don't get me wrong. We are instructed to love, to care for, to prioritize our family, certainly above ourselves. But there's a difference between a high priority and top priority. If I allow even my family to direct my decisions in life at the highest level, even above God, that's actually Satan using my family against me. They may not in any way be doing anything wrong. I'm the one who set my priorities wrong. Same goes for work. Same goes for finances. Same goes for hobbies. It doesn't matter. Anything that I allow to be in charge of my life, that's Satan using it if I put it over God. And Satan will run me into the ground. Notice what Peter says. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. You know what Satan loves to see as he's prowling around? He loves to see someone with wrong priorities. He loves to see someone who is willing to put anything in front of God because he knows that's his end. He knows if he can let anything else take top priority in a person's life, all he has to do is sink his teeth into that thing, and he can turn that person whatever way he wants them to. It's been a while ago, but we talked about, I think it was in a Devo after a fellowship meal one day, we talked about Satan's ideal society. Satan doesn't need a society that is completely and absolutely just disgusting, awful, full of the most egregious sins. He doesn't need that. That's not his ideal society. You know, you think about that, you just go everywhere and people are cussing, people are beating each other up, people are just abusing each other in every way imaginable. No, Satan doesn't need that. He's fine with a society of people who are distracted. He's fine with a society of people who are apathetic. He's fine with that. Because when you are just steeped in the worst of the worst, it's a lot easier to see what's happening. If you're just apathetic, if your priorities are just a little off, you can deceive yourselves. And Satan is nothing if not a liar. Paul would say in Romans chapter 6, the wages of sin is death. That's what Satan has to offer. Whatever he may dress it up as, it's sin. If it comes from Satan, it's sin. Because Satan, by definition, is the corrupter. Taking what God has done, all that God has made, and twisting it. You know, the word sin, it has this idea of missing the mark. You ever done archery or target practice with a rifle or something like that, or a pistol? If you get just to the side of the bullseye, you're still on target, right? But you missed the bullseye. You missed the mark. It's not perfect. That's what sin is. That's the imagery that's used. You miss the mark. You may get close, but the idea is not that we're going to be perfect, but if our priorities are not fully and completely centered on God, what flows out of that is sin. Notice, Paul himself uses this imagery of running a ship into the ground as he describes with a broken heart, even some of his own companions. He tells Timothy to hold faith and a good conscience. And he says, by rejecting this, in other words, by refusing to let Christ be our captain, some have made shipwreck of their faith. Just run it aground. Now I ask you, what good is a ship if it's stuck on land? Are you going to get where you're trying to go? No. anything or anyone that Satan can convince me to follow, other than God, because Satan will never try and convince me of that, right? Anything or anyone that Satan can convince me to follow will turn my life into a total wreck. Now again, when I say a total wreck, maybe you're picturing someone who has spent all of their money on drugs and alcohol and is on the streets and is just driven themselves into the ground in that sense. That's not the only picture. Your life can be a total wreck when everyone thinks your life is great. I know some people, I'm not going to go into much detail, I'm not talking about anyone in this room or around here, but I know some people who everyone thinks they are one of the best people ever, one of the most godly people ever even. And when you actually look at their life, it's a total wreck. They don't know it. They'll never know it because they've convinced themselves that the press clippings about them are true, that everyone else's opinion of them being amazing are true. But in reality, their life is a wreck. It doesn't have to be obvious in your face, but it will be obvious in the end. The only way, the only captain that can get me where I'm going, that can get me safely home, that can allow me to make it through all those storms that we just sang about and finally make safe in the harbor of heaven. It's only God. And I say only God in two senses. Only God can be the captain, and only God, He can be the only one who takes that top priority. That can't be shared with anyone else. God alone as my captain is the only way I'm getting home. Now again, don't misunderstand. Family, job, even hobbies and entertainment, all those things can have a place in their proper priority. But none of them can be the captain. Not even the co-captain. Because as soon as I elevate them to that level, that's when God says, you've compromised. I love my wife. I will put her above anything that I need to the best of my ability. Not that I'm perfect at that, but I'll do my best. But she's not my captain. I can't let that happen. I love history and studying about those kind of things, but the second that I allow that to drown out the things I should be doing for God, I've got a problem. I love this congregation. And we're all trying to put God first. But even fellow Christians, if we're not careful, can influence one another to get other things in the wrong place. I'm not saying my wife or y'all or anything else is currently doing that, is currently tempting me in that way. I'm saying anything that we allow to start vying for that position of captain, to start trying to get a mutiny going, if you will, it presents a temptation. And we can't let that happen. Now we get to Proverbs. Solomon, the wisest man in the world. If anyone would know how to direct their own steps, it would be him. And you know what he says? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. All or nothing. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. He's not quite using a shipping metaphor. It's more of going across land on a path that's difficult to go across, to travel on. And he's saying he'll make it smooth. But if we want to use that metaphor, we can take it over. He'll navigate you past the shoals. He'll navigate you past the rocks and the icebergs. Don't want to pull a Titanic, right? He'll get you to where you need to be. If you put all your trust in him and don't lean on your own understanding. Because leaning on your own understanding, what I know, what I think, that's exactly what Satan wants you to do. He will eat that up. That's why Peter would say there is no salvation, or there is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. There's no other captain. There's no one else that gets me where I want to go. I have heard many people say, some version of there are many paths to God, there are many ways to salvation. There's only one. It's Christ. It's His teachings. It's what He tells us. That's the only way. It's the only way. Jesus summarizes it very well in John chapter 14. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's it. That's it. Gonna show my nerdiness again, but in The Lord of the Rings, in some of the lore of that world that Tolkien created, to get back to Valinor, the land of the Valar. This is this special place where like the corruption hasn't taken place, and Morgoth and Sauron and all those people aren't there anymore. And you're like, what are you talking about? Anyway, to get back there, you have to sail. You have to sail across an ocean. But the only way to actually make it from one point to the other is to know where to go. And only one person in the entire history of this world that Tolkien created ever actually makes it from one point to the other. Because he was guided. Everyone else gets lost on the way. There's only one person who can get us where we want to go. Christ Himself. There's no other way. And everything, not just that clearly is in opposition to Christ, everything else that Satan can twist and deceive us into thinking is an appropriate captain for my life. It'll get us lost in the fog, drifting aimlessly, never making it to home. No matter what lies the world may tell us, because ultimately, again, Satan is the one who is feeding those lies. God is the only one who can guide me to true fulfillment and success. Those words are often thrown around in our world. Often they describe fulfillment in terms of career, fulfillment in terms of relationships, success in terms of financial gain. None of those are truly fulfilling. None of those are true measures of success. God's way is the only way. And beyond any blessings we gain in this life, and there will be blessings in this life, as well as challenges if we allow God to be our captain. True success is measured by who hears the words, well done, good and faithful servant. No other success matters except that. The biggest decision I will ever make, it's not who I marry, it's not what job I take, it's not what career path I choose. The biggest decision I will ever make is who will be captain of my soul. Tragically, we can look throughout history and see many people who tried to be their own captains. Didn't go well. We can see many who tried to make someone else their captain. Didn't go well. See those who made family, wealth, anything that you can mention. They made that the captain. That's the one thing I get to choose. You want to talk about being the captain, being the one in charge? The only thing that I really get to choose is who's going to be the captain of my soul. That's the one thing I own. And I have to make that decision wisely. Otherwise, I'll never make it to where I want to be. If there's anything we can do to encourage you, pray for you, to help you this morning, we all want to get to the harbor, to the safety, to the fellowship of God and Christ. We want to help each other in that. We want to keep one another from allowing the wrong things to take charge. So if there is something we can do to help you, please let us know as we stand and sing together. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take Him at His word. just to rest upon his promise, just to know thus saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how